Strategic breakthrough of the Russian army in the Kursk region. The days of Sudzha are numbered. Good afternoon, dear friends. We are still with you in our daily format, analyzing the situation on the front. Well, Trump and Putin had a phone call. There is a lot of information, but I won't overload you with it here. The main thing I would highlight here, and this is quite telling, is that Trump proposed to Putin to agree on a ceasefire. Putin said no. Putin said he is not interested in freezing the conflict. He only wants a lasting peace. Negotiations will be conducted separately, and the front will continue to live its own life separately. The military goals and plans that were set will continue to be pursued. That's how things stand. Therefore, we continue to analyze the situation on the front. Let's open the map. So, I want to start discussing the situation in the Kursk region with you. Zelensky recently announced plans to exchange the territory held by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, UAF, here in the Kursk region for territory held by Russia, somewhere on the main front line. Well, the reaction has already followed, a specific reaction from Maria Zakharova and Peskov. The message is clear. No one is going to change anything. Well, let's see what is happening here. And you know exactly the same thing is happening as at the beginning of January. What am I talking about? Remember, there was an attack by the UAF on Bolshoye Soldatskoye. Well, they didn't reach it. That was just the goal. In general, the attack was on the Kutor-Berdin and nearby villages. The attack lasted several days. Then the UAF fizzled out, and Russian troops went on the counterattack, and the UAF no longer had the strength to repel these attacks because they had exhausted themselves in their offensive. Then, remember, this entire territory was taken at the beginning of January. Now the situation is repeating itself. Exactly the same. Look, in their offensive, the UAF occupied a maximum of about 10 square kilometers of territory in this area. Moreover, they have already lost control of Fansivka. But we will come back to this. So let's note the figure of 10 square kilometers. That's the result of the offensive. And do you know how much they have lost since then? I'm not talking about the main front, where, you know, they are steadily losing 8 to 10 square kilometers every day. I'm specifically talking about the Kursk region. I'll tell you, Russian troops, a few days ago, after the UAF's offensive potential was exhausted, went on their own offensive and in the past 3 days have taken 11 square kilometers. That is, even taking into account the 10 square kilometers occupied by the UAF, they are at a loss of 1 square kilometer. But now let's get into the details. The fact is that they no longer control these 10 square kilometers. So let's take this section of the UAF's offensive. What's the situation here? It hasn't changed much. The UAF are no longer trying to advance towards Ulanok at all. On the contrary, they have now switched to defense, while already losing the positions they had taken. For example, look, during the offensive, the UAF reached this point. That is, they were within 1 kilometer of the village of Ulanok. Now they have been pushed back to Cherkasskaya Konopelka. Accordingly, at the moment, they are 2 kilometers from Ulanok. In addition, as I already said, the UAF have lost Fansivka. They are no longer there. They are also not in the forest plantations around the village. These plantations have been cleared. Now the main area of concentration of the UAF is Cherkasskaya Konopelka and the forest plantations around the village. As a result, even here in this area, the UAF have already lost 3 square kilometers and now control only this area. Cherkasskaya Konopelka, the Kutor Kolmaki, and these fields between them. That is, their total control here is now about 6.5 square kilometers. But the most interesting thing is unfolding not here, but to the north. There, the Russian army has achieved a colossal success in terms of strategic position on the Kursk front. I would even say, you know, a turning point in the entire Kursk battle. Now I will tell you about it. Now, despite these negotiations, the front continues to live its own life. Well, we return to the situation in the Kursk region. As I already said, the main and very important successes of the Russian army in the Kursk region are to the north. This is here, the Sverdlikovo area. Look, as of today, February 13th, most of the village is under Russian control. The UAF retains only a small part of the southern part of the village, or rather one street, and they clearly won't be able to hold out here for long, considering that they have already been driven out of the rest of the village. Why is Sverdlikovo so important? Why do I say that success here is de facto a strategic success or a turning point in the Kursk battle? Let me explain. 2 points, or rather even 3. First, the UAF fortified the village very well. They dug fortifications inside the houses, set up heavy machine guns, and placed grenade launchers. All this was done because the UAF used Sverdlikovo exactly as they are now using Sudzha, that is, as a command base and a place for accumulating reserves. So despite the good fortifications, the UAF could not hold the village. Accordingly, all these fortifications have now come under the control of the Russian army. The UAF, as I already said, hold only the southern outskirts, but they cannot even bring in reserves from the Sumy region. Why? Because this supply road from the neighboring village in the Sumy region, from Basovka, where it is located, is now cut off by drone operators. Any vehicle is immediately hit by an FPV drone. Therefore, despite the fact that Sverdlikovo is on the border, the UAF cannot supply their garrison, or rather the remnants of their garrison, in Sverdlikovo. The second point. Look, after Sverdlikovo, there is a direct road to Zayoleshnik, and, accordingly, to Sudzha. That is, let's measure. It turns out to be 8.5 kilometers of direct road. That is, after the Russian army pushes through and completely drives out the UAF garrison from Sverdlikovo, and there is no doubt that this will happen in the very near future. Then after that happens, the UAF garrison will be driven out, and the Russian army will use the village as its own logistics and command point. Ahead will be an open road to Sudzha, and without a doubt the movement will go there. And here we smoothly move on to the third point. Look, now the main supply route for the UAF's Kursk grouping is this road from Yunakovka to Sudzha. It is already under constant attacks by FPV drones, because the distance here is sufficient for FPV drone strikes. There is even video of vehicles being hit one after another. So the UAF are already starting to experience supply problems. But the Russian army is still 8 kilometers away from this section of the road. And what will happen after the capture of Sverdlikovo and the advance towards Sudzha? There will come a moment when not only FPV drones will strike, but everything that can strike will do so. And then the moment of judgment will come for the UAF's Kursk grouping. It is also necessary to understand that the movement towards the road, towards this main supply artery, is also coming from the direction of Kurilovka. And from there, let's also measure, it's a little more than 7 kilometers. In general, the pincers are closing, and the success of the Russian army in Sverdlikovo may well be a turning point in the entire Kursk battle. The direction of Bolshaya Novoselovka on February 13th. The Russian armed forces continue their offensive. Units of the Russian armed forces are advancing northwest of Bolshaya Novoselovka. This area is of interest because in 2023, the UAF created a significant number of fortifications here. Currently, these fortifications are being destroyed at a high rate. This may indicate a lack of prepared UAF forces in this direction. It seems that the UAF did not expect such a development of events. The situation remains under observation. Malinovka-Toretsk direction on February 13th. Malinovka, Vodyanoyev, Toroye, Tarasovka. In this area, the activity of reserves is becoming increasingly noticeable. On February 13th, the leadership of the DPR announced the capture of the settlement of Vodyanoyev-Toroye. Thus, the 3-day battles for its industrial zone ended in favor of the Russian armed forces. This opens up the possibility of advancing towards Tarasovka. At the same time, preparations are underway for the assault on Malinovka, and fighting continues in the area of Yelizavetovka. Kupiansk direction as of today. Zayoskolye, the situation. The advance of the Russian armed forces in this sector has slowed somewhat. The rapid successes achieved earlier, as well as the need to establish logistics for the advancing troops, which is a top priority in modern warfare, especially given the active use of drones, have become the main issues currently being addressed by the command. Nevertheless, progress continues. Units of the Russian armed forces have approached the settlements of Dolgonkoye and Doroshovka and are preparing to storm them. The Novopavlovsk direction on February 13th. The situation. In this area, pressure on the UAF grouping in the area of the Volkhya River continues. Units of the Russian armed forces are gradually narrowing the zone of control, and north of the river they are completing the clearing of Andreevka and pushing the UAF forces out of the fortified areas north of the village. After these actions are completed, the positions of the Russian armed forces in this area will finally stabilize. The Pokrovsk direction on February 13th. The counter-battle south of Pokrovsk continues. However, a turning point in favor of the Russian armed forces has emerged. Even yesterday's events, when units of the Russian armed forces regained control over the industrial zone near the village of Peshanoye, showed that the UAF forces in this area are limited. This contradicts Kiev's expectations. Reports from Ukrainian sources have become noticeably less active, and by evening the attention shifted from Pokrovsk to other topics. Meanwhile, units of the Russian armed forces are seizing the initiative and gradually pushing the UAF back to their original positions. By evening, it became known that after the threat of being cut off from the main forces in the Kotlino area decreased, the Russian armed forces regained control over the plantations north of the village. Well, that's all for today on the situation on the front. Well, I'll say goodbye to you for now. I wish you a good working day and see you soon.